this is Emma, and I just thought I'd pop in here for a moment and record, as promised, one of the first commentaries before we get too far into the story. Begin to explain a little bit of what I'm doing here, why I'm doing it, why I chose to do this in this way and at this time. So I'll try to keep this brief. I want to keep these episodes fairly short. The chapters I am trying to keep short, around 10 minutes. 1,500 words is my goal. So that keeps it about 8 to 10 minute read or listen. So I don't want this to be a whole lot longer than that. I just want to explain a little of the history of how this is unfolded the way it has. It was an idea that came to me in 2013, as I was then deeply religious and fairly right-leaning. We don't say hard right, but fairly right. And I was entertaining at the time several conspiracy theories, and I thought, oh, there's got to be a thread that links them all together. And so, honestly, I kind of chose 3 or 4 of them out of the basket of many things and formed a story around them. And, I will just say, we use, and I'll have a whole episode on this, how we use language to prejudice our listeners. And I will say that when I say conspiracy theories, that has a very negative connotation. We think of Q and QAnon, which I'm not sure I was really aware of at the time. I'm not sure it was a thing at the time, but it was definitely that kind of Alex Jones sort of content. Having said that, when I look at the route I ended up taking, as things began to shift for me, and I will just say that some conspiracies are real. The conspiracy that is the class system in the United States that's based on race and color is real. And that was one of the themes I ended up taking. I'm not sure I meant to take it in the beginning. I have always actually been very much about racial equality, simply because I don't understand. I'm very much a gray area sort of person. I don't understand where you draw the line. So somebody is of African descent, but their skin color might be very dark or it might be very light. But as somebody who has a very small amount of African history, I'm very white. And so where do you draw that line, right? My cousin, who's the same generation back from that ancestor as me, is very dark skinned. So, who's black and who isn't? And yeah, so I took up vaccination, anti-vaccination. I took up anti-disability, ableism, colonialism. I don't remember at the beginning. I think in the beginning it was sort of this ultra-modern, it was definitely dystopian. But I'd also at the same time had this idea about this man who was sort of in the higher up area of government. Not exactly a leader, but sort of a dignitary or an ambassador of some sort, who was hiding some kind of affliction that would have otherwise disqualified him to be in the ruling class. And so, because everything else I write is set in historical context, and then of course, in the meantime, as I'm researching these books, steampunk begins to be a thing, and so several ideas converged at once to become what it is now. And so, just describing it, the theme of it is, it's dystopian in that it takes place after a great catastrophe where a civilization is rebuilt. But it's rebuilt kind of in an extreme way to the ones we are living in now, and I include all of the Western world in that, really. So, as things in my personal life began to kind of crumble, I began to try to push through with this book. I completed the first volume. Then I went through this period where my marriage began to crumble. And because my marriage began to crumble, my religion no longer worked for me in the same way. It's one of those things, it's a very groupthink sort of environment. And if you're married and you're raising children and you're staying home and you're doing all of your responsibilities and all your friends are members and you're not, experimenting with controversial things like yoga or meditation, all of that to say, I began to kind of stretch my imagination a little bit about what truth was and what philosophy was. And I'd been a student since my teenage years of English literature. And so I've taken a lot of cues from that as well. And so I always found a lot of wisdom in the things written by Dickens, or one of my favorite authors is George Meredith, who was super didactic. His stories are just chock full of life lessons that still apply today. So all these ideas began to converge at the same time that my marriage began to crumble and I began to have serious doubts about my faith. My father became ill, and so I had to return home to take care of him for a while. While I was gone, my ex-husband and I decided to divorce. And then came COVID and opportunity not to go to church at all, which I'd actually kind of physically exited already. But during COVID and lockdowns, a lot of things came out about it and the opportunities were there to really research the historical claims of it. And so I began to realize, like, not only was this not for me, but it wasn't true. It just simply wasn't true. And provably not true. That's the thing. They like to say, you know, you've been led astray or whatever, but I've learned that sort of gaslighting is part and parcel of being conservative, unfortunately. About that time as well, my sister was killed in a car accident that was totally preventable. And the story around it we were given was just one lie after a lie. And so I think I became very impatient with lying, with the lies that people were telling. And also, just prior to this, I had begun to study yoga in a very serious way. And the required reading for that was, I think it's Don Miguel Ruiz who wrote The Four Agreements, and just began really doing some serious introspection about my part in the difficulties I was experiencing, and just really began to realize the amount of trauma I was carrying and the amount of trauma the world carries. So anyway, I began to really see how very overly complicated I had made the book. I got to a point where it was like, I either need to do this and do it right, or just drop it. And I'm not one of those people who drops a project, but it no longer really represented who I was. And also, you know, when I started this, there was this urgency because I actually got to a point where, even though I voted for Obama, the things that people were saying about him, I began to believe. You know, Alex Jones did this whole thing about how they're all in a cult. They meet at Camp David to worship owls or something like that, you know, with the Illuminati kind of thing. And so I had this urgency to write this book and to like warn people about the dangers of politics without really understanding what I was talking about. But as the years progressed, and I just could not make headway with this book, and it just was getting more and more complicated and felt just way over my head. I just kind of made an ultimatum, and I told myself that if we ended up with a female president, I was going to let it drop. And if we didn't, then I would commit myself to doing it. And then I really thought we were going to get a female president, and we didn't. And so I don't want to delve back into this dystopian. Who wants to read dystopian when we're living it? I don't. And I'd kind of decided, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to really concentrate on my other career. Thought about doing a podcast with a friend, and then that sort of fell through. And so then I was left with all this space I'd created, and in that began dreaming. And I will talk a lot about that. I think this is the age of dreaming and really listening to what our dreams are telling us, I think especially for women. So I had a dream where I saw how I could kind of make this all much simpler. I understand better now how we got here. And I don't have to go into these long chapters at the outset of how we got where we are. So the whole book at one point was really working up to the point where the rebellion begins in earnest. And the fact of the matter is, I think we've been in this. There are people who will say that we've been kind of in a psyop war for, 2 or 3 years already. And I can see how that's probably true. I will also say at the outset of this that I have a tendency to hold more than one truth in my mind at once, and so I'm still deprogramming from the religion I was part of, which I do consider to be cult adjacent. I won't say it's a cult, but from psychological standpoint, it is considered a cult adjacent religion. And so deprogramming from that, sometimes I have to hold more than one truth in my mind at once. And I don't have conflict about that. I know very well that there are things that are still changing and morphing in my mind. But at any rate, all of that to say, I saw a new way forward, and there were things that I wanted to do and try with the narrative voice that previous editors have really discouraged me from doing. And I know that a traditional publisher would be like, I don't like that, I don't think you should do it. But there are books where that has been done and done well. And so I don't care. At this point, I'm going to do it my way. And I've also been looking for an alternative to traditional publishing, which I don't want to give up my story to somebody else. And it makes me angry that all these middlemen have so much say about my creative process. And so, I've kind of been searching for another way to do this. I sort of want to do a podcast. I sort of just want to get my work out there to as many people as possible and hope that it resonates. As I was saying before, it started out as a sort of ultra-modern dystopian, and it has morphed into sort of a mix of what I call Dickens industrial London meets dystopian steampunk solarpunk. So dystopian has a tendency to end very dismally. I kind of have gotten to a point where so many things that I've talked about in this book have come to be serious issues. Like I said, I was dabbling the anti-vax position when I was developing the first 2 volumes of the book, and since then COVID has brought that issue into the fore, and I realized, while yes, mandatory vaccinations are an amazing way for corporate pharmaceuticals to make a lot of money and even manipulate things, whatever that means, they are also essential. It's life-saving medicine. And so I kind of took that element out of it. So anyway, I kind of got to a point where I saw that all these things were sort of coming to pass that I had written about and suggested. And I began to wonder, is this the reality I've created for myself? And how do I undo it? And so, taking it a completely different tack, the book begins as the rebellion begins. People coming together and saying, we don't like the way this is going, it needs to take a different turn. Man's Eden is very much influenced by past cultures, and I've done that intentionally. You'll see the headers are quotes from Dickens. I may throw in some others at some point. I kind of have a feeling I might just stick with Bleak House just because there's just so much relatable treasure in that book. But so it is modern, but it's also not. And it's dystopian, but it's also not. It's also solarpunk, which means that it ends on a high note. It ends with us, the dreamers, coming together and imagining a new and more wonderful world. My intention is also to offer hope, to offer something that encourages people to dream and to create something better and look past the things that really don't matter, which is ultimately what you and I look like, what you and I drive and wear, and the colour of our skin. And it really has more to do with how we connect and the communities we can build together for our greater good. And so that is the message from the outset. And I will build on a lot of these themes more as we go on. Thanks so much for being here, and I'm still experimenting with how Substack works, and I will probably post to YouTube as well, and maybe have a Patreon account. I think ideally I would just like to put all the information out there, all the podcasts, all the reading, all of it, and just have a donation-based sort of thing. That's ideally what I'd like to do, but I'm still trying to figure out the best way to make this all work. So forgive the paywalls for now. I'm not sure they're there to stay. I'm not really in this for the money. I just want to build an audience and share what I'm dreaming of, and to encourage you all to dream as well, and dare to dream big, because it's all possible, even if it doesn't seem that way. All right, and that's it for now, and I will catch you in the next episode. Thanks so much. Be blessed, everyone.